If you had asked any global investor 30 years ago what Vietnam's future looked like, you would have received the same polite, hesitant smile, the kind you give when you don't want to say something discouraging out loud. Vietnam back then was a wounded nation. It had just emerged from one of the most brutal conflicts of the 20th century. Its infrastructure lay in ruins, its cities bore the scars of bomb craters, and its economy had almost no presence on the global stage. Daily life was defined by ration coupons, shortages, and endless rebuilding. Foreign companies avoided the country entirely. Analysts wrote reports that bordered on obituaries. But ask global corporations that same question today, and their tone changes instantly. Vietnam? We're already moving production there. Vietnam? That's our next big investment. Vietnam? If you're not inside, you're already behind. Something extraordinary has happened. A nation once dismissed as fragile and doomed has rapidly pushed itself into the global manufacturing ecosystem. Vietnam is now one of the fastest-growing economies in the whole world. Its population is expanding. Its technological capabilities are rising. Its export capacity breaks record after record. International companies line up to enter its market. And economists, for the first time, are openly debating whether Vietnam could be on par with Japan, and perhaps even surpass it in the wildest dream. Vietnam was never supposed to be the winner in anyone's script. Yet here it is, writing its own. To understand Vietnam's rise, you must begin with the land itself, a geography that looks like it was designed to create difficulty. The country stretches more than 1,600 kilometers from north to south, yet squeezes to barely 50 kilometers wide at its narrowest point. It is a country that can be cut in half with frightening ease. It is battered by storms, squeezed by mountains, and drowned by monsoon rains. The geography seems to whisper, survival will not be easy here. In the north lies the Red River Delta, the cradle of Vietnamese civilization. Its fertile land fed ancient kingdoms, supplied soldiers for resistance movements, and nourished a culture that survived even under 1,000 years of foreign rule. The Annamite Mountains loom behind, acting as a natural barrier and shaping centuries of defensive strategy. Storms come down from China. Floods rise from the rivers. Life in the north has always been a constant negotiation with nature. Moving down the country, the terrain tightens into the narrow central coast, where the land is so thin that the mountains and the ocean seem to touch. Every year, typhoons born in the Pacific first tear through the Philippines, and then aim directly at this exposed coastline. Cities like Da Nang and Hue have been broken and rebuilt so many times that resilience is built into their foundations. Further south, the land suddenly opens into the immense Mekong Delta, a wet, fertile, endlessly branching network of rivers and canals. It produces so much rice that Vietnam became one of the world's biggest rice exporters. And at the edge of this watery labyrinth lies Ho Chi Minh City, energetic, chaotic, ambitious, and always hungry for growth. Vietnam is squeezed, battered, flooded, and carved by nature. But that same geography also gave it three huge gifts: unmatched agricultural wealth, a long coastline that connects to global trade routes, and natural terrain that taught its people how to endure. It is no coincidence that Vietnam's national identity is built on resilience. The land itself demanded it. Vietnam's history reads like a series of impossible battles and impossible victories. No country is invaded for 1,000 years straight unless it occupies a strategically vital location. And no country survives that long unless it develops extraordinary stubbornness. Vietnam knows what it means to live under foreign domination. The Han dynasty conquered it in 111 BCE and ruled for centuries. Chinese dynasties imposed political structures, cultural norms, and administrative systems. Yet resistance never stopped. Uprisings flared constantly, most famously the rebellion led by the Trung sisters, two women who rode elephants into war and became eternal national symbols. Vietnam regained independence in 938 CE, but invasions didn't stop. The Mongol Empire, the unstoppable force that conquered Korea, China, Russia, and the Middle East, tried to invade Vietnam 3 times. It failed 3 times. No one else in Asia can make that claim. During the medieval era, Vietnamese kingdoms expanded southward in a long process known as Nam Tien, absorbing territories once controlled by the Cham and Khmer. The modern shape of Vietnam took form through centuries of struggle, movement, and cultural fusion. Then came the French, bringing nearly a century of colonial rule. They built railways, ports, plantations, and administrative buildings, not out of charity, but to extract rubber, rice, and minerals. Yet even under colonization, Vietnamese resistance movements grew stronger. After World War II, France attempted to reassert power, and lost spectacularly at Dien Bien Phu in 1954. It was the first time a European colonial empire suffered such a defeat in Asia. But this victory came with a tragic consequence: the country was split in two. North Vietnam aligned with the Socialist Bloc. South Vietnam aligned with the United States. And Vietnam became the stage for one of the most devastating wars in modern history. By the time Saigon fell in 1975, factories were destroyed, infrastructure was shattered, farmland was poisoned, and millions were dead. Vietnam was unified, but barely alive. Many countries would have collapsed permanently after such trauma. Vietnam did not. By the early 1980s, Vietnam faced a crisis almost as severe as the war itself. The planned economy wasn't working. Farms couldn't feed the population. Inflation soared. Factories stood idle. Families survived on ration coupons. And the country, isolated on the global stage, had almost no access to foreign technology or capital. Then came 1986, the year Vietnam shocked the world with an economic revolution known as Doi Moi, or renovation. Vietnam did something incredibly rare: it kept its political system, but radically transformed its economic model. Land was privatized. Farmers could keep their harvest. Private businesses were permitted. Foreign companies were invited in. Trade barriers fell. People were allowed, finally, to dream. Many economists doubted the reforms would work. But Vietnam had already survived invasion, colonization, and a superpower war. Economic reform was nothing compared to that. The results were explosive. Agricultural output surged so dramatically that Vietnam went from food shortages to becoming one of the world's largest rice exporters. Millions were lifted out of poverty. Industrial zones sprang up. Infrastructure projects accelerated. And foreign investment, once non-existent, arrived in waves. Samsung built massive manufacturing complexes. Intel opened semiconductor facilities. Nike and Adidas moved production lines into the country. Supply chains that once centered around China began diversifying south into Vietnam. Vietnam didn't rise overnight. It rose through the accumulation of millions of individual decisions: farmers planting more, engineers learning new skills, entrepreneurs taking risks, laborers working overtime, students studying English, policymakers opening doors inch by inch. That is what real economic miracles are made of. Place Vietnam's economic trajectory next to Japan's, and you see a story of two nations moving in opposite directions. Japan once symbolized unstoppable growth. But since the 1990s, the country has suffered decades of stagnation. Its population is shrinking at alarming speed. Its society is aging so rapidly that by 2050, nearly 40% of its citizens are expected to be elderly. The labor force is evaporating. Consumer demand is weakening. Innovation is slowing under the weight of demographic decline. Vietnam, meanwhile, is bursting with energy. It has surpassed 100 million people, and is still growing. Its labor force is young, ambitious, and expanding. Its cities feel like they are permanently under construction, with new factories, bridges, and technology parks appearing every year. Companies from Japan, South Korea, the US, China, Singapore, and Europe are pouring investment into the country. Japan is shrinking. Vietnam is swelling. Japan is aging. Vietnam is young. Japan is cautious. Vietnam is hungry. And hunger, in economics, is one of the most powerful forces in the world. According to demographic forecasts, Vietnam's population could come close to Japan's by 2050. That doesn't mean Vietnam will match Japan's wealth anytime soon, but it does mean Vietnam will have something Japan cannot regain: demographic momentum. This alone could transform Vietnam into one of the largest consumer and labor markets in Asia. Numbers tell only part of Vietnam's story. The rest must be seen on the streets of Hanoi, in the factories of Bac Ninh, in the startup cafes of Da Nang, and in the hyperactive energy of Ho Chi Minh City. Vietnamese youth are driving the nation's leap forward. They are learning English at astonishing rates. They work in factories by day and take online courses by night. They open small businesses, learn coding, build apps, create online stores, and dream of joining the global tech world. In interviews, multinational companies consistently say the same thing. We didn't come for cheap labor. We came because Vietnamese workers want to win. That desire, the refusal to stay small, is Vietnam's secret weapon. Vietnam's culture of effort is visible everywhere. Families invest heavily in education. Young people migrate from rural areas to cities with relentless determination. Workers are known for their discipline, adaptability, and willingness to master new technology. The result is a labor force that learns faster than companies can train them. Vietnam's people are shaping its destiny, one skill, one risk, one ambition at a time. Vietnam's ascent is impressive, but it is far from perfect. Economic inequality is rising. Wealth is increasingly concentrated among major conglomerates, especially Vingroup, whose influence spans real estate, retail, education, healthcare, and automotive manufacturing. Housing prices in major cities are climbing fast, putting pressure on young families. Rural communities still lag behind industrial centers. Environmental problems are escalating as well. Industrial pollution threatens rivers and farmland. The Mekong Delta faces saltwater intrusion caused by climate change. Urban congestion is growing, and infrastructure struggles to keep pace with expansion. Politically, Vietnam's one-party system must confront corruption, bureaucracy, and demands for greater transparency. Vietnam is rising, but it is rising with weight on its shoulders. This question sounded absurd 20 years ago. Today, it appears in serious economic reports. Vietnam has many of the same advantages Japan once had during its golden era: a young workforce, a thriving export sector, social stability, a national drive to improve living standards. But unlike Japan's rise, Vietnam's growth comes at a time when global supply chains are being redesigned. Companies want diversification, cost efficiency, and political stability, exactly what Vietnam offers. Vietnam is close enough to China to benefit from existing supply networks, but not close enough to inherit China's geopolitical burdens. It maintains friendly relations with major powers. It is strategically positioned for the next era of globalization. Will Vietnam become the next Japan? Or will it become something entirely new, a country that rises faster and adapts quicker than Japan did during its own miracle years? The more accurate question is this: as Japan slowly declines, will Vietnam become the rising power that fills the gap? Vietnam's story is not an accident. It is the product of geography that demanded toughness, history that demanded resilience, and a present that demands ambition. This is a nation that has been invaded, colonized, divided, starved, bombed, and isolated, yet still refuses to break. The world underestimated Vietnam for centuries. Now, Vietnam is reshaping the global economy in real time. It does not have Japan's industrial legacy, China's scale, or South Korea's corporate giants. But it has something far more valuable today: a young population, an unshakable drive to rise, and a clear understanding of the opportunity before it. Over the next 25 years, Vietnam will be one of the most important emerging economies to watch. It may not replace Japan entirely, but it will almost certainly claim a larger share of Asia's influence. Vietnam has survived everything history threw at it. Now it is finally ready to claim the future.